Welcome to my cooking class as part of this course. Now, when you're going to be starting to cook, and if you haven't cooked from scratch very much, you need to have a few basic dishes. Now, this probably looks like a lot, but I'll explain that you don't necessarily need all of these. So when I cook, I like to cook a lot, and the reason for that is it saves time. Now, it doesn't necessarily save money in that we in the family are still going to be eating the same amount of food, but it saves a lot of time in that I don't have to do this every night to cook dinner or every lunch. So I cook a lot, and then I don't have to cook for 3 or 4 or 5 days, depending on how much it is. And I literally don't have to, bring all the pans out, cook everything again, clean it all. So I like efficiencies. So this is what I have learned how to do in the last few years, and it really works. So basically, I need some things to put in the oven. I prefer to cook in glass. The non-stick isn't going to start to come off. It's consistent heat, and it usually doesn't burn very quickly. If you put a metal pan in the oven and you don't watch it a lot, then you're going to more likely burn things. So I prefer glass. You can't cook things as hot, I've noticed, so I never cook past around 380 or 400 degrees. It works great, and it's fairly easy to clean because I can just scrape, it doesn't matter what I'm using to scrape it off. So I like glass pans for the oven. Once in a while I will do a sheet pan, but I don't like these non-stick because they scratch up a lot, and then it's hard to cook on them because you don't know if you're gonna be eating some of those. So I'll line it sometimes with parchment paper. I need a few bowls. I'll be needing a few bowls to mix things. I'll need a strainer for boiling eggs. In the last year, I've found a way to steam the eggs, and the peels come off easy. I've got my good cutting knife, a cutting board, peeler, and to sharpen the knife before I start chopping a lot, because there's a lot of chopping involved. I usually try and sharpen it once a week. I have some kitchen scissors, a few spoons. Got my grater here for cheese if I'm going to make cheese sauce or just grated cheese. I've got a few utensils here that I'll probably be using. I've got the metal spatula and also plastic spatula. I've got my garlic press. When my wrists are feeling strong, I can use this. Otherwise, I'll just chop, and I can show that in the future. I've got a whisk for when I'm making. I've got a whisk for if I'm making the cheese sauce. Then I've got a couple pans. I've got a few small frying pans. These are non-stick. I've got a big pan, which actually now this is how I cook my bacon. And then I've got a cast iron pan. This is a fairly large one, which I like because then for a while I was using the next size smaller and things would just start spilling out. Now you'll notice there is rust on it. Now I personally want the iron in my body. It's good to have some iron in our body, and because I don't usually take supplements, then this is how I'm getting some iron. So I do wash it out with a scrubber every single time. I know people will say don't ever do that, but I wash it out, and yes, it rusts. Then I wash it once more to get that top layer of rust out, and then I start cooking right away. And so that's what I'm doing to get my iron in my body instead of taking supplements. I've got my pot holders. Now this is a gas oven. For the last, up until 2 months ago, I was using an electric oven, and so I'm still getting used to this one. I have to turn all the vents on, which isn't super fun and makes it loud. So this is the prep for all of the things that I'm going to need to do this bulk cooking, and I need around 3 hours. So that's what we're going to need. Okay, I'm going to start by sharpening my knife. I got it a little bit wet, and I'm just going to go forward on the one side. This is just a very simple knife sharpener. And then I'm going to pull it towards me very carefully so I don't cut my hand. And I'm at about a 45-degree angle. I will show you there is another way to sharpen knives. I learned this in the restaurant I used to work at. I don't have another big knife right now, but even if you just have 2 knives and you can just go like this. Now this has serrated edges, so I'm actually going to use the back side of this one. It's just another metal surface. very, very carefully, you're going metal on metal. Anyways, that's one way. Or if you have one of these, or if you have a actual proper knife sharpener, just take your time. This one has one with more grit and then one with less grit so that it finishes it off. And then you just rinse this off in the water to get all of those little filings off. And the way you tell if it's sharp enough is you take your thumb and you go across it, and if it feels like it's got some grit to it, then it's sharp. Now we're going to bring out all of the vegetables and fruits that I bought, and I'm going to show you what 20 types of vegetables and fruit looks like. And this is what I'm going to use to cook today. This is the pile of food, and I'll take it all out of its packaging. So here are over 20 varieties of vegetables and fruit. I have a broad definition for vegetables, basically anything that's come out of the ground. And so I do put potatoes as part of vegetables, which it's actually a tuber starch. I also have sweet potatoes, which is a tuber, but I put it in the category of vegetables. I have garlic and I have parsley. Parsley is an herb. I've got parsley, spinach, beans, cucumbers, garlic, celery, peppers, sweet potatoes, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, peas, carrots, broccoli, onions, tomatoes, zucchini, and cabbage. And then I also have a coleslaw mix, which is a pre-cut up ones, which actually has everything that I already have here except for the red cabbage. I don't have a red cabbage. Then I have some fruit. These are perfectly good bananas. I keep them in the fridge after they are almost ripe, and they can last for almost a week in the fridge. They go brown on the outside, but they're fine on the inside. I've got a lemon, some frozen berries, a pear, and some kiwi. So there's more than 20 here. But this is an example of what I go and buy, and then I cook it up or prepare it, and then I have it for several days. Now I'm going to probably only use a quarter of the cabbage. I'll use all of these. I'll use all of this, and probably half of the cauliflower. If I cook too much, then I get tired of it, or not enough people in the house eat it up. We're eating sort of the same foods, because this isn't talking about any of the meat yet. This is just the vegetables and fruits. And of course, I have blueberries almost every day, or some frozen fruit every day, but this is just an example of what 20 varieties looks like. Now, if you do not have access to get all of these varieties, if you would prefer to not eat these types of foods, then try to, experiment, try to bring in as many varieties. I used to hate Brussels sprouts. Now I've figured out, thanks to my daughter, figured out how to cook them that they don't taste so bad. I used to not like sweet potatoes. Now I cook them and I incorporate them. It's not my favorite thing, but I have a few bites. My daughter loves those. I figured out how to make cauliflower that doesn't taste awful. So the first thing I'm going to do is wash everything. I have a handy dandy wash thingamajiggy. I'm going to wash the beans first so I can put them in this and wash them in the sink. And what I'm going to do with the beans is I'm going to cut the ends off, even though they're not too bad. And yeah, I'm going to put the berries and the bananas back in the fridge, and the pear, because that's just an example of what you're going to eat, but we're not going to actually eat it today. So what I do with the beans is I line them up. I cut off the edges or all of the ends, and I just line them up like that. And then I cut them into bite-sized pieces, basically, so they're easier to eat. If I'm going to put something in the glass dishes, I'm going to put them in here and season them. And so this is what I'm going to do with the seasoning part. And so I'm cutting off the ends, and some of them are rotten. Line them all up, cut off the ends. It's not the end of the world if some of them are there. bite-sized pieces. Now I have a compost container with a compostable bag, so that's going to all go in the springtime. I'm going to put it in the garden, but for now I put it out in the recycle. So I'm just going to keep cutting these. When I was growing up, I'll tell you some stories of when I was growing up. I remember we had a big garden, and I remember sitting and we would snap the beans. Now these ones aren't very ripe, but when they're right off of the vine, it would make this snapping sound, and that's how we would cut them into smaller pieces, and then we'd put them in bags into the freezer, and we'd have those all winter long. That's my memory of beans. Growing them, weeding the garden. Back then we didn't know we should keep the ground covered, so it was all bare dirt around every plant, which means all of the weeds would show up, and all I remember was weeding the garden all summer long. So then after we're almost done this, we're going to season it. Now I have technically the 20 items, doesn't include spices. So I've heard it recommended you have 30 varieties of plants and vegetables of some sort throughout your week. So that also can include the pepper and any other, spices that I have. And I have them over here. And I cheated and bought a chicken and ribs spice at Costco. So it's a little bit like really spicy. So I can add a little bit of that, just a tiny bit. You don't have to do that. I've many times just cooked with salt and pepper. And I got a new salt and pepper shaker, Christmas, that has this Himalayan salt. So what I'm doing is preparing it to put in the oven. And I have learned recently that salt is not bad for you if you cook from scratch. All of this prepared foods that we have in our diet have a lot of salt. But when you are not eating prepared foods, you've got to add it because our body needs salt. Got my olive oil. I'm adding some olive oil to that, and that's almost ready to put on in the pan. I'm going to add a tiny bit of cayenne pepper just for some more flavoring. And actually I'm going to use the regular salt because I know I need a little bit more. So I have all my pans everywhere. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you where that is going to go in one of those glass pans. So I've got the glass pan here, and I'm going to put a tiny bit of olive oil in there and spread it around. Then I'm going to toss this. So it's got the spices, the salt, a little bit of the olive oil. I'm going to put that in the pan. If it's not single layer, it won't brown as much, but that's fine. I'm just cooking them this way. It saves having to cook them on the top of the stove, and when you're doing a lot of different things, you want to not have everything to be cooked on the top because you'll be cooking for a long, long time. So it's sort of being efficient and making use of the whole oven and stove. So that's ready. It's put away, and those don't go brown. If I cut up the sweet potato too early, because what I'm doing is I'm prepping everything. If I cut up the sweet potato too early, I got to keep it in water because it will go brown. The potatoes go brown. Those are probably the only things that go brown, but just to remember that. So I'm going to do the potatoes last because they do go brown, and I don't want them sitting in water because if they sit in water, then I got to dry them off or they don't fry as well. So I'm going to take off the outer layer of the cabbage because it was just sitting. So I'm not actually washing everything. If I take off a peel, I'm not needing to wash that, but otherwise, yeah, whatever I'm actually going to eat directly, then I'm going to want to wash that. So I'm only going to cook about a quarter of this because I'm actually going to also use that pre-made coleslaw mix to show you that you can use that if you don't want to buy a whole cabbage. But cabbages are pretty cheap. I used to not like cabbages, and now I'm starting to like it. So I'm gonna, if you don't have a food processor, you can just cut this by hand. So if you'll notice, and when I was at Cook's training way back in the 80s, I learned how to cut things where if you can get a knife that's got this rocking option. If it's straight, then you're going to have to like lift it all the way up. But if you can keep part of the knife down at all points at all times, it goes faster. And so I'm just rocking it like that. This is a great knife my daughter bought me. So I'm wanting to chop these quite small. By the end, my wrist does get sore. So my daughter's boyfriend bought me a food processor at Christmas, which is great. But for this, I will show you how to chop things without using a food processor. Now I can't rock it when I've got so much here, so I'm just going to go like that, chop it up. So you want it fairly small. If you get a big bite of cabbage, it can be a bit bitter. So what I'm doing with this is I'm going to combine it with these. I'm going to put it in the same bowl that we used for seasoning the green beans. The thing about coleslaw I've noticed is it doesn't always, the pieces aren't always symmetrical. They put it through a mixer, which also I have found with any food processor is that you'll have pieces that go through. So you can always just chop it into smaller pieces. You want it to be uniform so that every bite you don't come across and one's bigger than the other. If you think of julienne, which is when you cut things in small, if you've been to a restaurant and they're cut into these small, long, thin pieces, the point of that is so that they're all very uniform. So when you're biting into something, it's consistent and everything is the same. Like for stew, you want the potatoes and the meat and the carrots to all be about the same size. Anyways, that's just something to know. I'm going to leave that for now because I'm actually going to be adding garlic and some onions and some parsley.